Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Stitch Bliss Corner. Maria Rose here. I'm going to talk today about Assisi embroidery because of a question from Cindy Martinez. And just before I start, I would just like to say a hi to Sylvia Beckersland, and thank you very much, Sylvia, for your kind words. And keep up the good work with all your fabulous stitchery, and I look forward to seeing your next video. Okay, so yes, as I said, we're going to be doing Assisi, and Cindy Martinez said that she was interested in Punto Assisi stitching. So I've had a bit of a look into it, and the words Punto Assisi means stitching from Assisi, and the two words are explained as follows. Punto, the Italian word punto, is a versatile word, and variously it means point, spot, stitch, dot. And Assisi is the name of the village where Assisi embroidery began, and I will just show you where Assisi is. Here we have a map of Italy, and there's Assisi there. And then we zoom in a little bit further. It's in a volatile region. There are a lot of earthquakes in this area. And there is a mountain there, just above Assisi, which is there. Closer again. That's with the walls around it. They've been preserved around the village. Then the Basilica, St. Francis, the Basilica of St. Francis, and it's rather a large building, isn't it? And it's got some monks' quarters there too now. That's from the fields down below. And it's quite a vast building. And as you get closer, that's the entrance there. There are two churches, one built on top of another. And you can't really talk about Assisi unless you talk about the two famous people that were born in the region, and that was St. Francis of Assisi and St. Clare. So I've got a little bit about both of them. St. Francis, he was born to a wealthy family, and he was a man about town. And when he was about 20, he got sick. And when he got better, he became disgusted with the rich, opulent life that he'd been living before he got ill. And he rejected it. And one day, in prayer in a chapel, he believed he was answering God's call to accept his life to a holy offering. And his father was very upset about all this, and told the local bishop to have a talking to him, put him right. And what happened was, according to the Time Life book I've got here, in the world of Giotto, This is a quote from there. It says, "Summoned before this dignitary, Francis, in a stirring scene that many a painter would subsequently dramatise, stripped off his clothes and declared, 'Listen, everyone, and understand it well. Until now I have called Pietro Bernardoni my father, but now that I intend to serve the Lord, I am returning to this man all the money that has caused him such a pother, and all the clothes that were his property, and from now on I shall say, Our Father which art in heaven, instead of my father Pietro Bernardoni.'" The words "such a pother" vividly express the new Francis's profound contempt for material possessions, especially money. "Dung," he once called it. From then on he owned nothing but a ragged garment, tied a rope round the waist, and lived anywhere on the charity of others. He began to restore some chapels near Assisi that had fallen into disrepair. A band of followers formed. Francis preached that the beauty of nature was God-given, and therefore to be enjoyed, and all creatures were God's creations, therefore kin, that all men were brothers and equals, that humans were bound together by love born of the knowledge of Christ that resided in all of them. He said, "Your God is of your flesh. He lives in your nearest neighbour, in every man." So it says here, "He banished the sense of gloom that had pervaded Christianity and supplanted it with joy. Up to then the faithful had been taught their brief span on earth was an insignificant prelude to eternity. Francis did not see it that way. He felt there was a harmony between physical life and the spirit post-death. He believed in kindness to fellow man and helping the poor and needy." And St. Clare, she was also from a wealthy family, and she heard Francis's teachings. And it says here, St. Clare of Assisi, she was born in 1194. She was the beautiful eldest daughter of Favorino Schiffi, Count of Sasso Rosso, and his wife. Tradition says her father was a wealthy representative of an ancient Roman family, and her mother was a very devout woman belonging to the noble family of Fiumi. As a young girl, Clare dedicated herself to prayer. At 18 years old, she heard St. Francis of Assisi preach during a Lenten service in the church of San Giorgio, and asked him to help her live according to the gospel. And then she went on to found a nunnery. Right, so that's St. Clare. And the reason why I mention this religious connection is that Assisi embroidery had its origins in copying many of the motifs from religious buildings. So I just have a few pictures in here. Now there's a story about St. Francis and birds. He went out into a meadow and he was preaching to the birds, and the local townsfolk were running around saying, "He's a madman, he's a madman." Well, of course he wasn't. He was just showing that all of God's creatures are important and to be respected, was his feeling about them. Now, he became someone that artists wanted to portray for the various religious buildings. And this one is by Bonaventura Berlinghieri, and that's the altarpiece that he did with St. Francis. And if you look there, you'll see some birds there, and that's St. Francis preaching to them. And here's a close-up. And I think you can see from looking at those birds that there are quite a few samplers and other stitching that do have birds not unlike those. Then we have, I'll just do you St. Clare, just so you can see what the artist decided to depict her. There's a building there. Where is she? Oh, she's just there. And you can see someone toppling down off the roof of the building. And that's a closer up there. And the story behind that is St. Clare repels lustful Saracens and saves Assisi with her prayers. In the detail from this scene, enlarged from the opposite page, she is seen praying in the monastery window while the unsuccessful invaders tumble from her roof. Oh, from the roof, not her roof, of course, the roof. She doesn't look very frightened, does she? So, great believer in the power of prayer. So now I'll just take you on to some of the architecture and sculptures and things inside various churches to show the inspiration for Assisi work. You can see there are patterns there on their clothes. How their clothes are draped. The regularity along there for borders. Fertile ground for stitches. We've got some animals down the bottom there, leaves and things. It's a rather magnificent lion there. Patterns. Just see if there's anything else in here. Oh, this is pieces dedicated to St. Francis, and you've got a horse there. All motifs that were used in Assisi work. And there's a work by Giotto. He was decades after St. Francis, but St. Francis inspired much of his work. Okay, so that's a little bit of background there. Now we'll just go on to some of the stitching. This here is an altar cloth, but you can't see. Apparently on here is a lot of Assisi work, but you can't see it. It says it's the Night of Solano Death, tablecloth embroidered with characteristic motifs of Assisi lace, but you can't really see it. But I suppose if you visited one day, you might be able to see it properly. Couldn't really get a good picture of that. Okay, now it says here, Assisi was popular as an ecclesiastical embroidery technique and used to decorate the altar cloths and vestments, etc. And Assisi work, the secular work, was more about demons and satyrs and strange mythological creatures. But the ecclesiastical Assisi work concentrated on birds and animals and religious aspects. That was the difference between the two. The name is taken from the town of Assisi, where young girls were trained in convents. Convents were responsible for providing the decorated textiles for the churches and cathedrals, as well as the vestments worn by the clergy. Today, Assisi work is over an even weave fabric, and the motif is usually outlined in Holbein stitch, and I'll show you that after. Assisi work has bold designs with bright backgrounds, reds, blues, greens and gold, and the picture is white or void. They call that the void because there is no stitching on the void part of Assisi work. The background is usually stitched in long-armed cross-stitch, but modern Assisi is usually now in regular cross-stitch over 2 or 3 threads, and colour can be used in the previously blank motif. So they've certainly come a long way from the voiding. What else have we got here? In the 13th and 14th century in Italy, an embroidery style was developed that became the basic style of Assisi embroidery. The motif design was voided or blank, while the contours and background were embroidered with coloured silk. The whole of the background was filled in using filling stitches. Right, so I just won't want to leave anything out. In the 1950s, DMC published a book with Assisi embroidery and patterns, and there are various books on it. The motifs: animal figures, birds and mythological animals. Some of these animals look like a new breed of animal. There are mirrored motifs, and if they have expressions, they are usually serious. Flowers, branches, leaves and fruit are used, and a candelabra motif is common to separate mirrored motifs. The design is usually repetitious and is supposed to be that way. 2 colours are usually used, one colour for the contours of the motif and the other for the background. The contours are in straight stitch and the background in cross stitch. There is usually a border along the top and the bottom of the design, geometric in character. The contours of the motifs are only made of horizontal and vertical stitches with very few diagonal stitches. Well, that was the original anyway. I think things have moved along since then. And let's see what else we have here. Right, I'll just show you the actual stitches used, and then I'll show you the examples that I've got here. Okay, this is Embroidery Stitches by Mary Webb. So we have Holbein stitch, and that stitch came from, it's named after Holbein the Younger, who used to paint pictures in the Tudor court. He painted Henry VIII and his family, and his sleeves had the double running stitch, as they call it, and they called it Holbein stitch. And the double running stitch, if you use your imagination for a moment, and if I was doing this running stitch, I would go put the needle in, underneath, over, underneath, over, so that you would just see one stitch straight down, another stitch straight down, another stitch straight down, and another one straight down. Then I would come back and I would do a stitch across there, a stitch across there, a stitch across there, and a stitch across there to fill it in. So you fill in the gaps on your way back. And it's a bit like if you did just a running stitch on a hem, for example, and then you came back with your cotton and you took it out of the hole of the last stitch and into the next one, so that it looked like it was a continuous line of stitching. But you can see it on the internet, they'll show you how it's done. Then the other one that is used, this is for the background stitches. There are at least 3, but there are more than 3 that are used. One is called the long-armed cross stitch, which is, you know, this is done in ribbon, and I think it's to try and make it clearer, but I'm not sure that anything could make it clear. But instead of having an ordinary cross, the one goes right forward like that, and then it gets filled in as you go along. Again, you can see that on the internet. And I think once you got into the rhythm of doing it, it'd probably be quite simple, but it looks complicated. Then there was Italian cross stitch. And as you can see, it's very, very dense. And you can imagine that the voided part of the Assisi work would pop against such a dense background. Then we have the final one here, which is Montenegrin stitch, which is very similar to the long-armed cross stitch, but there is a stitch going up as well as the crosses. That's what differentiates it. So they're all used as filler stitches for the background. And here are some examples of Assisi work. And as you can see, the very barest number of stitches are used on top of the voided area. That to show that it's an acorn, and that to show it's a leaf. This is an early one, 1600. And here's another one that looks fairly old because the fabric and the fibre used to stitch it, it looks quite thick. That's another one. It's another example of, and I suppose that would be the candelabra they were talking about, how it separates the two images that are mirror images of each other. And of course the border. There's another one. And this one is part of that, and it's just to show they haven't quite finished it. So they've just tucked the needle in there. They haven't got a needle minder, and that makes 2 of us, because I haven't got one either. More examples. There's one of St. Francis's birds. And these are modern ones from the town of Assisi. They have a guild there, and the women produce works of art for the guild to sell in the shop. An Assisi Tudor rose. All tastes must be catered for by the looks of it. I'd be okay, wouldn't I? Then we have a Celtic knot. It's quite complex there. Another one. And it looks to me as though that void part has now got white stitching in there. And this one, the voided areas have almost disappeared, haven't they? I mean, there's a few voided spots in there, but nonetheless, beautiful work. And they still have the symmetry, the mirror image. I suppose that's a candelabra or not, but anyway. Okay. Some more. And there's the Montenegrin stitch, but I don't know, you can still see gaps in there, but maybe they were going to, I don't really know why. I mean, there's an awful lot of stitching on there and it still hasn't covered it, but that's a mystery. And there's another bit of Montenegrin stitch there. So, embroidery inspired by the church. I'll just see if there was anything more to add to that. I think I've just got a few. This was a New Stitches Christmas supplement that just showed a bit of modern Assisi work. And there's a little bit on the back there. That's this one. Jane Greenoff's cross stitch. And this was, issue 37, January to February 2004. So, quite a while ago, but there's a bit of Assisi work there. Well, Cindy, thank you very much for your question. I knew that St. Francis of Assisi was associated with animals, but I had never heard of him going out into a field and preaching to the birds. That's a lovely image to have, isn't it? Thank you very much for watching, and happy stitching, and I'll see you all again next time. Bye for now.